How did your favorite NFL team perform this off season? What's going on, football fans? It's Mitch back here with another NFL rankings video. And in this video, I'm tier ranking every single NFL team's 2024 off season. How successful, in my mind, was your favorite team at improving their roster, getting better for 2024 and beyond? Did their moves in free agency and their picks in the draft actually make sense to the equation of competing for championships in the future? Gronk, spike the like button. Let me know in the comment section below which tier your favorite team belongs in. And don't forget to subscribe for a lot more NFL offseason content, including a lot of fun rankings videos. This is the place to be. When the schedule comes out, man, videos galore. Right after that, rankings galore. This is the place to be, the BLV. Let's go, man. I'm going to share my screen, and we are going to rank all 32 off seasons. Let's go. No edits, no cuts. This is how we do on the BLV. So here we go. We're going to go in alphabetical order as we've been doing throughout this offseason, and we are going to begin with the Arizona Cardinals. Now, the Cardinals, these are the categories that you can fit in, Cardinals. Monumental, which means a life-changing, franchise-altering, NFL-altering offseason. Watch out, which means I really like this offseason. It might not be impactful for years to come, but it could be impactful directly to 2024. Step forward, which means the team took some nice steps forward. They got a little bit better. They did what they had to do. It wasn't anything pretty or sexy or flamboyant, but it was nice. Time will tell is an evaluation of, I kind of like what they did, but I'm not really sure. I kind of need to see how this works out. Same is same. They are basically the same team. No difference. Good, bad, mixed. Regression means this team definitely got worse. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing long term, but they definitely got worse for this year. And WTF is self-explanatory. What the fudge is this NFL team doing? Okay, so now that we know the categories, let's begin with the Arizona Cardinals, man. And I think the Cardinals took a step forward this NFL offseason. I don't think they went out there and absolutely made splash after splash in free agency. They certainly did not. They went more of the veteran addition approach with some contracts that weren't big money, like Justin Jones and Bilal Nichols on the defensive line, like a Mac Wilson at linebacker, like a Sean Murphy Bunting at the corner position. I think they had a really nice draft, which is where I'm really convinced they might have hit a home run here in terms of Marvin Harrison Jr., potential all-pro wide receiver for years to come. Max Melton, Elijah Jones, two corners that I think could be starters for them long-term. I like the style they play with. I love their ability to potentially play both man and zone in the NFL. I think they're both going to be guys that could play on the outside of the formation, play press coverage. I like the style they play with. I also don't mind the safety pick as well to provide depth for Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson, because we don't know how much longer those guys will be around. I do think that the Isaiah Adams pickup through the draft was very nice. Jonah Williams coming in and securing the offensive line, protecting Kyler Murray, was a wise choice. Loved the Christian Jones pick out of Texas. I think he was a steal in the 5th round. And they already had a couple young pieces, especially offensively, to work with. Paris Johnson, Trey McBride, Michael Wilson, even a Greg Dortch. I think that this team definitely took a step in the right direction. I don't think they're going to be contenders this year. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs this year, but I definitely think they're going to be a better roster and an overall better team in 2024. Shout out to Darius Robinson, if I already didn't discuss him, but hopefully he can turn into a really good contributor to this pass rush. I still feel like they could have done more to help the pass rush getting after the quarterback. I still felt they could have brought in a true difference maker on defense, which I don't think they've done for now, but they've added some quality pieces for the future. The next team is the Atlanta Falcons. Now, the Falcons are fascinating because I thought they had a really promising free agency, but they had an absolutely horrific draft in many ways. Just the vision of putting together and piecing together the cohesiveness of free agency and the draft, for many, this is not controversial, just didn't make any sense. Signing Kirk Cousins and then drafting Michael Penix in the first round didn't seem to make any sense. No matter how many different ways people will spin it. It just doesn't make sense. Now, Darnell Mooney was a nice little pickup out of free agency. I do think that they already had many pieces on offense, so they didn't really need to improve a lot. Getting rid of Desmond Ridder allowed them to move on to a new era and then also pick up a potential number 3 receiver in a Rondale Moore. Defensively, I wish they would have spent more money on the pass rush. I wish they would have been more aggressive in the draft to address the defense for right now, because with Kirk Cousins, he's going to need a defense to aid him, to help him to wins in the playoffs, especially, and to get over the top and win this division. They didn't really add any immediate contributors in free agency, and I'm not even sure in the draft they added any immediate contributors to the defense. Braylon Trice and Arororo could potentially be guys that could help, but I don't know if they're going to be impactful right away. And this is a flawed defense on paper, especially in the front seven with the pass rush. So the Atlanta Falcons are difficult. I think that time will tell with them. I think that this offseason is highly dependent on Michael Penix Jr. If Michael Penix Jr. is a good player, even if he is like the 12th best quarterback in the league for a few years, I feel like that was a worthy pick, and it was worth even paying Kirk Cousins short term and then picking Michael Penix to be the long-term guy. So time will tell, because I think many could say in 3 or 4 years that, hey, their team was close. Let's say Atlanta wins 10 games this year and they lose in the wild card round by a field goal. A lot of people will say, well, if they would have used that first round pick on a corner or a pass rusher, let's say Latu or Quinyon Mitchell, maybe they would have won that game. Maybe they would have gone on a little bit of a run in an NFC that maybe is a little suspect. Maybe they could have, been a contender for a couple years, especially if those type of players go on to be very successful NFL pros, and if Michael Penix does not. So this is a time will tell class. On top of the fact that could some of these later picks in the draft, like let's say a Rororo or Trice, end up being ballers, that's potential. That's potentially, the case. But I think there's just a mixed signal here. Were they trying to go for the short-term success? Were they trying to go for the long-term success? Because sometimes you can't have your cake and eat it too, right? So, you know what I mean. The Atlanta Falcons. All right. Next up, on the alphabetical order, we got the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens, this one's tough, actually, because I feel like some could argue they stayed about the same, and I think others could argue that they definitely regressed. I don't think they got better. I wouldn't say that. I don't think that they had a horrible offseason by any means. I think the thing that's bugging me is the offensive line, because I don't really know what the answer is for the offensive line. Is Ben Cleveland going to be a baller? Is Andrew Voorhees a good player? I don't know. He was a 7th round pick. Is he going to be starting? Is Roger Rosengarten out of the second round going to be immediate right tackle player? Who is playing on this offensive line, and how could it be way worse and catastrophic? Could it actually be cost effective and make them better in other areas? Could they go on to sign players later this offseason to help the defense maybe? My thing is, like, they definitely got worse at linebacker. They definitely got worse on the offensive line. I think wide receiver probably got a little worse, although probably not very, impactful. Running back got better. Tight end with Mark Andrews being back, I guess you could say they got better there. They did retain Justin Madubuike, which was their main goal. They did add a number 1 first-round pick corner in Nate Wiggins to just strengthen their secondary after losing Geno Stone. They also drafted TJ Tampa. I don't mind that pick, but their pass rush is still suffering. Can Isaac contribute? I don't really know if their pass rush has enough tools on the edges post Mike McDonald to get after it and get after a Josh Allen or a Patrick Mahomes or a Joe Burrow in this AFC. So I kind of feel like the Ravens regressed maybe just slightly. I don't think it's a major regression, definitely not a WTF, but I also feel like they lost enough pieces on the O-line, Jadeveon Clowney, Mike McDonald, enough big names, Geno Stone, where I feel like I could place them in the regression category. After that, we've got the Buffalo Bills. The Buffalo Bills are next up. The Buffalo Bills. Where do I want to put them? I think this one is kind of a time will tell. It could be a kind of same. It could be regression, depending on how you see it. I think that the Bills got slightly worse, potentially, for 2024. But I also feel like they could have gotten better for the long term. So I'm going to put them in the same category for that mix of results. So obviously they lost Stephon Diggs. But they also did draft a second rounder, Keon Coleman, with, I think, the first pick in the second round. They seemed to like him a lot. I wasn't a huge fan of him, but I'm going to reserve judgment on that. Keon Coleman could be a number 1 in the NFL, or at least a number 2, to help contribute on a cost-effective contract and then allow them to have a productive receiver, maybe not a Stephon Diggs level receiver, but a productive receiver that also allows them to save a lot of money for the future of their team. They also added Curtis Samuel, who I like a lot, on top of Chase Claypool, Mac Hollins. So they definitely spent, I wouldn't say capital, but they spent volume at the wide receiver position. The offensive line is largely the same. Not too much difference outside of Mitch Morse departing and Connor McGovern taking a step into the center position, David Edwards taking a spot at the guard position. David Edwards has been a good player in the NFL. I'm not too concerned there. Osiris Torrance is probably going to play better at right guard. They also brought in Collins, former Bengal, former Cowboy, at right tackle. And then you would expect guys like Dalton Kincaid, James Cook to only take more primary positions in the offense. Although those aren't additions, I think that's what they're trying to factor in here. They also added KJ Hamler, I believe, late last season, so maybe he could become something. I've liked, instances of him. But there's enough there at wide receiver to say they could find 4 guys that can contribute. Defensively, I think it's a real interesting offseason for them. Because, yes, a lot of big names left, right? Like Jordan Poyer left. He's in Miami. Micah Hyde is still a free agent, so he could come back. They did lose Tre'Davious White. They did get rid of, AJ Klein, I guess, would be another one. I believe I'm missing somebody in the front 7 that they also lost. Leonard Floyd, okay? He was on a 1-year deal. But you actually look at their defense and you say, Matt Milano's coming back, so that's going to immediately improve them. They also lost Dodson to Seattle, who was a really good linebacker for them last year, but their linebacker depth is actually pretty solid. Like Matt Milano, Terrell Bernard, who I like, Dorian Williams, who's a young player in his year 2, Nicholas Moreau, who was the best Eagles linebacker last year, Deion Jones, right? Even Balin Spector is not horrible. He's mostly a special teamer. They also drafted a kid in the 5th round. So they've got a lot of linebackers on this roster. The D-line is pretty much the same. They lost Leonard Floyd, but hopefully Von Miller can get his head out of his rear end and contribute on passing downs. They do still have AJ Epinesa, Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones. They re-signed AJ Epinesa, Daquan Jones. They still have Gregory Rousseau. They still have Ed Oliver. Those are their 2 best guys. Dwayne Smoot comes in out of free agency. They draft Dwayne Carter. They draft Javon Solomon. They have Deshaun Williams. They have Austin Johnson. All these guys have played a lot of snaps in the NFL. So there's enough quality depth there, and at least guys that you know can play a little bit in the NFL. So I don't think their D-line is in horrible condition. I think their secondary, like, people are going to look at Tre'Davious White and be like, the name of him, but, like, he hasn't played for them, right? Like, Christian Benford is good. Rasul Douglas was excellent for them last year. Teron Johnson is very good at nickel. Cole Bishop, I like that draft pick a lot. I love the addition of Mike Edwards out of free agency. Taylor Rapp was good for them last year, and I liked him on the Rams. Kaiir Elam was a former first-round pick. He's the 4th corner on this team. So I still think the defense has a lot of depth at all 3 levels. They might not have the superstar name power they used to have like a year or 2 ago, but they're also getting younger and fresher. So I actually look at Buffalo and I say, like, the roster overall has a lot of depth and a lot of players. They maybe don't have the superstars that they did. So that's what I would primarily say about Buffalo, which is why I think they're about the same. Moving to the next team, we've got the Carolina Panthers. I definitely think they took a step forward. Now, I don't really know how much this is going to help them for the long term, though, and I'll explain that in a second. But Xavier Legette is going to be, I think, like, the addition that is going to be the most impactful for their franchise for the future. Because a lot of their additions were short-term fixes. Deontay Johnson was a trade that he's on a short-term contract. Will they sign him long-term? That's yet to be known. Deontay Johnson's a good receiver. I wouldn't categorize him as a number 1 receiver. I'd categorize him as a good number 2, a guy that can run crisp routes, get open and separate. He is inconsistent, though, and a tad soft, but I do think that he can do something that the Panthers receiving core didn't have previously, which is a crisp route runner that can get open. Xavier Legette, that 1st round pick, they traded up into the 1st round to get this guy. Big, strong, fast, physical guy. Needs some nuance to his game. I'm a little worried about how his game will translate to the NFL, but I think he has a lot of potential, right? They did bring in 2 guards in Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis, who will be long-term fixtures there on the offensive line, given their contracts. But will those be hits or misses? Robert Hunt, I think, is going to be close to a hit, but he's very expensive for a guard. And Damian Lewis, I think, could be maybe inconsistent. He has, I still think, some potential left in him to squeeze out. I think he's a good player, a solid guard. I don't think he's excellent, maybe slightly overpaid, but I do think that they made some nice additions here to just beef up the O-line, protect Bryce Young, and get their ground game going. Jonathan Brooks could be their running back or their starter for the next 3, 4, 5 years. I wouldn't be shocked by that. I think he's talented enough to become that. And they didn't really have a pure number 1 back. So that's interesting to me. Their defensive moves were almost all short-term moves. Jordan Fuller on a 1-year deal. Dane Jackson on a 1-year deal. DJ Wonham on, I think, like a 3-year deal. Clowney, I think, was a 1 or 2-year deal, and he's older anyways, right? Like Ashawn Robinson, that's a short-term deal. All these moves that they made on defense, besides the draft picks, like Trevin Wallace, I like that pick, by the way, were all short-term. Josie Jewell, short-term. So they're going to have to find out, who their core pieces are beyond Derek Brown. Because other than Derek Brown, even J.C. Horn has not proven himself to be a fixture of this defense long-term. They're going to have to figure that out this year. Hopefully they made enough offensive improvements to elevate Bryce Young. And then I think in 2025, 2026 is where they're really going to be able to kind of navigate the defensive side of the football. But man, that's where I say, like, Carolina, step forward for this year for the now, but offensively, maybe more of the long-term moves. Defensively, still a lot of questions for the long term, but it's definitely a step forward. They're definitely more talented than they were a year ago. Chicago is up next. Chicago, of course, is interesting. This could be monumental. I mean, I think this draft, this offseason for them could have been as close to monumental of a projection as you possibly could get. Caleb Williams with the first overall pick, and just the way that lined up for them. Like, trading out of the first pick last year, not taking Bryce Young, although they probably could have had CJ Stroud, I will say that. And then getting more picks to be able to have this offseason that they had and get Caleb Williams, a potential franchise quarterback, both in terms of talent and also image, swagger, confidence. I think he has that, and looking forward to seeing him play in the NFL. But not only Caleb Williams, but Rome Odunze, who could be this team's #1 target for the next 10 years. And I wouldn't be shocked, right? Beyond DJ Moore, who probably is in his prime for the next 2 to 3 years, Rome Odunze is going to be that dude for them, maybe as soon as year 2. I wouldn't be shocked by that. I think he could be that good. The offensive line, they didn't do much this offseason other than just short-term fixes at center, which is fine. Running back, they did add DeAndre Swift, kind of a short-term fix, although he's not old. It's the running back position. He's already played 3 or 4 years and has an injury issue, concerns and history. They did draft a left tackle. He could be really good, but I'm not exactly sure. Defensively, they did make a couple moves in the draft, like Austin Booker. I don't think that's going to be monumental, but a lot of the moves that they made on defense, like Kevin Byard, is just kind of like raise the floor of their secondary and things like that. They honestly didn't do a lot on defense. But I think the reason it would be monumental is that the Bears finally found a franchise quarterback, which I don't know if I've ever said in the history of my life watching Bears football. And then on top of that, they might have a top 10 receiver in the NFL, or like a top 20 receiver at the very least in the NFL for years to come. And then, on top of that, that's just going to make everyone else around them better. So, and then Keenan Allen on top of that makes them better right now. So, yeah, it could definitely be monumental. The Bears could be really good as soon as 2024, but you would hope by 2025, 2026, this team is at least in the playoffs. After that, the Cincinnati Bengals. Ooh, the Bengals, I would categorize the Bengals offseason. By the way, I'm just going to say again, thank you to all the Bengals fans out there. You guys are amazing. Appreciate all the Twitter love, especially. I don't see a lot of Twitter love out there, or X love, or whatever we're calling it. Shout out to the people. Also, shout out to all of you that watched the Bengals rant. I never really know how many people are going to be watching those videos, so it's always awesome to see those blow up. So shout out to the Bengals fans out there. This one is a tough one to evaluate, because I think at the beginning of the offseason, we kind of thought that it was going to be a regression for the Bengals, given that T. Higgins was kind of up in the air, given the fact that, okay, DJ Reader's a free agent, okay, like, guys are getting older here, they've got some holes to fix, right tackle, what's going to go on there with Jonah Williams, running back Joe Mixon, like, there was a lot of unknown stuff. So thinking about the Bengals, I think that you could make an argument that they're definitely not a time will tell type team. They could be a same, depending on your perspective. They could be a step forward, depending on if you feel like they got better. They could also be a watch out, depending on what you think of the moves they've made. I would say that they took, like, I don't know. Like, this is tough. I think they're between these two. Like, I definitely think their roster is better than last year on paper right now. But I also feel like if this is the team for the Bengals that finally wins a Super Bowl, not putting them in the watch out category, I think would be a mistake. So I'm going to put them in the watch out category, and it's because of the potential of this roster. Because they're at a different point than a lot of other teams. Obviously, they didn't make a lot of huge moves. I mean, they didn't go out and sign Daniil Hunter. They didn't go out and trade for Stephon Diggs. I'm referring to another AFC team. But they certainly made a lot of impactful moves that I could see really paying off short term and then also long term. So first of all, they didn't trade T. Higgins. They didn't trade Trey Hendrickson. That's great. But they improved safety. Geno Stone could really help them in the back end of their defense. Von Bell is going to give them a stable force in the box as a safety. I think that Sheldon Rankins, Chris Jenkins, and then also McKinley Jackson are going to help them on the inside, replace DJ Reader, if not improve with the depth that they added, right? So that's their defensive real key additions. Offensively, where I really think they're making watch out moves is Jermaine Burton could be a watch out receiver for them. Like, that guy could be a spark to their offense from a speed and vertical perspective. I think Trent Brown could be a watch out. If this guy is healthy and motivated and he's on a good team, I've seen him play. You know, I'm a Pats fan. Trent Brown is a baller when he is on the field. And Amarius Mims, that could be a long-term security blanket for Joe Burrow at the tackle position. I also feel like low-key moves like Zach Moss, Mike Gesicki aren't bad additions to this offense whatsoever. So I think that the reason the Bengals are watch out is because this might be the Bengals team that actually gets them that ring. I wouldn't be shocked by that. Okay, so that's Cincinnati. After that, Cleveland. Cleveland, I think, mostly stayed the same. I think they got better for 2024 because they're going to be healthier. But that doesn't really count in terms of their offseason moves. So I would call them the same. I would say that, Deshaun Watson's still there. They did add Jameis Winston as a backup quarterback. That might help them. That might hurt them. Tyler Huntley's also there as well. They added him. They added Nyheim Hines as a running back. Deontay Foreman as a running back. Those are all depth pieces. Jerry Jeudy was like their one big addition that they made this offseason. And I think he'll move the dial a tad bit just in terms of having another quality depth wide receiver, right? Like, he's not a number one. I think he's more of a low-end number two, high-end number three option. I think he'll definitely help them, but I don't think he's going to blow the world on fire, set the NFL a storm, right? I also feel like their defense largely is the same. Shelby Harris, Dalvin Tomlinson, Zadarius Smith, Myles Garrett. I like the Mike Hall pick out of Ohio State. I think he's got a lot of pass rushing chops. Think long-term he could be really, really good. But he's not going to be an immediate contributor in my mind. Quentin Jefferson is more of that immediate contributor. He's been around the NFL for years. You kind of know what you're getting there. Jordan Hicks, another veteran that they added that maybe gets them a little better on linebacker, but not significantly. So, and their secondary is basically the exact same. So they didn't make that many moves, right? They didn't have a lot of draft picks. They didn't sign a lot of players. Their biggest moves are like Mike Hall in the draft, Jerry Jeudy at receiver, and Jordan Hicks at linebacker. And many of those are just slight improvements. So I would call them mostly the same team. After Cleveland, we've got the Dallas Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys, I'm going to put them in WTF just because, I don't understand why their owner, Jerry Jones, comes out and, maybe I'm being a little bit overzealous here. Maybe I'm being a little bit harsh. But the Cowboys, last year, that was their shot, in my opinion. I just felt like they were never going to be able to get past the Niners because of the matchup. But I would imagine that if they had Trevon Diggs and they were healthy, they would have been in the NFC Championship. I think that loss, that injury was so significant for their team, and long-term it killed them. But I also feel like they just choked last year big time. I think in a way that a lot of people have categorized them as choking in the past, but I just felt like they lost to better teams. I felt like in 2020, against the Niners. I felt like the Niners, although they were the lower seed, were the better team. I felt like in 2021, the Niners were the better team. Or 2022, was it? 2021? Am I getting my years mixed up? 2021, they lost the Niners. 2022, they lost the Niners. I think those Niner teams were just better, right? Like, I'm not going to get on them for that. I think there's been years where the Cowboys have lost games to just better teams, and people have called them chokers. I think there's been a couple of moments where they lost to the Packers and Aaron Rodgers in 2016. I think this past year, the Packers and Jordan Love, those teams felt worse on paper, and they lost to those teams. Those were choke jobs. But I just feel like Jerry Jones and his message for this team, I just don't understand what they're trying to do. You know, like, they got worse this offseason, right? Like, there's no doubt about it. Like, losing Tyron Smith and replacing him with a rookie, that is not going to be an improvement. Like, I don't care how you sell it to me, that is not going to be an improvement. It might help your team in 3 or 4 years, but not like, you could still sign Tyron Smith and then also draft Tyler Guyton. That you could have done that as well, you know, and you could have had the best of both worlds potentially. Cooper Beebe, I like that pick. I don't mind their draft. I thought they had a decent draft. Marshawn Nealon, I think long term, he's going to be like a Dorrance Armstrong type, maybe even better than him. But the defense, like, they didn't really solve anything about it. The interior defensive line is largely the same. That's a weakness. The linebacker is largely the same. Eric Kendricks is not going to solve anything. This is not 2017. The corner position, they lost Stephon Gilmore. Safety, they, haven't signed Jerron Kearse. He left, I believe. So it's like they lost some key pieces on defense. The offense can't be any better than it was last year on paper. They lost Michael Gallup. I don't really care about that. But they also lost, really Tony Pollard at running back. They lost Tyron Smith. They lost their center. I don't know. Like, I kind of just feel like the Cowboys I don't know what their plan is. Like, are they contenders? Are they not? What are they rebuilding? Are they retooling? Or like, what is their plan? I don't really get it. It feels like they only try to add things through the draft most of the time, and they don't really try to add things through free agency. They made like 2 rare trades last year for Cooks and Gilmore, and that was about it. Like, they feel like they've been close. They just haven't been able to put together a full offseason of a fabulous draft and a fabulous free agency. It feels like it's one or the other, never both, and that has kept them at good but never great. And that's why I'm just going to put them at WTF, because I just can't stand it anymore. The Denver Broncos are up next. The Denver Broncos... This one's tough, man. I'm going to put the Broncos... You know what? I'm going to put the Broncos at WTF. I am. I don't know how you guys feel about that. But this entire offseason for them is relying on the potential of Bo Nix. And I personally do not believe that Bo Nix will be anything special. And I look at this offseason and I say, this is your opportunity to have a reset year. And I view this team, Bo Nix or no Bo Nix, as the worst team in the NFL going into this season. Maybe they'll be the second worst team in the NFL, but they're going to be somewhere in the bottom 3 or 4. So we know they're going to be in position to pick another quarterback next year. It's just frustrating to think about. I think their draft was fine. I like Troy Franklin, Audric Estime. Those weren't terrible picks. Jonah Ellis was a personal favorite addition of mine. But choosing a quarterback a year before you're going to have a top 3 pick in very likelihood is a little puzzling. The offensive line lost arguably its best young piece at the center position, and Lloyd Cushenberry. I just don't like. Their best weapon is older, Cortland Sutton. They did try to add Troy Franklin, Josh Reynolds. Josh Reynolds is another short-term option for a team that is trying to rebuild, so it's a little bit confusing. They added John Franklin Myers, an older hybrid D-tackle D-end, another short-term addition for a long-term team that's in need of long-term studs. They got rid of Justin Simmons despite, like, it just, like, they're adding John Franklin Myers, but they're cutting Justin Simmons. Like, make it make sense. Like, Levi Wallace is an addition they made. It's just confusing. It's just confusing. I don't really know what this team is trying to be or trying to do. I don't get it. I don't think Bo Nix is the dude, so that also categorizes them as a WTF. What the fudge? All right, next up, the Detroit Lions. I think the Detroit Lions had a watch-out offseason, potentially even monumental if they are able to win the Super Bowl this year. Because I think that's what the Lions really could be, a Super Bowl team. I think they're maybe one move away from being that, which is another big-time receiver. If they had another big-time receiver, I would be all over Detroit for winning the NFC. I think that highly of them. But I do definitely think they made some watch-out, I like that type moves, right? Like, even a Marcus Davenport signing, which was very low risk, but potentially fairly high reward. If he stays on the field and he's healthy, he can be a starting defensive end in the NFL. Those are hard to find for the price that the Lions paid. And a decent compliment to Aiden Hutchinson, right? Terrion Arnold, just a nice need pick that they traded up for. They knew they needed to go get. Terrion Arnold, I think he could play outside or inside, play it pretty effectively. Carlton Davis was like a really nice, we identified the type of corner that we want. Press, physical, tough, championship qualities. Carlton Davis can bring us a guy that we can match up with other receiver ones in football. Re-signing Emmanuel Mosley for the upside. Signing Amik Robertson, who I thought had maybe the best year of his career in Vegas last year. Adding Ennis Rakestraw out of the draft. That's another addition that's like, he could be a corner, he could be a nickel, he could be a safety. So they just addressed their biggest area of need, which was the secondary, with a thorough beating of signings. And then offensively, they kind of just replaced Jonah Jackson with Kevin Zeitler. And that's pretty much it. They lost Josh Reynolds. I would have wished, again, another receiver would have been nice. Maybe even at the trade deadline, that could be something that they search for. But this is a team that was already in the NFC Championship, and I feel like they could very well get there again. The question is, did they do enough for this to become a monumental 2024? Or was it just a season where they did enough to stay about the same and get to where they were before, but not enough to push them over the top? So I definitely feel like it's watch out, because I feel like they have less flaws on paper, but paper doesn't always necessarily turn out to be the case, because things don't go as well. Players regress in terms of performance. Coaches, are figured out to a greater degree. Teams might be up on their Ben Johnson offense. They might be studying the habits of Dan Campbell on fourth down. They might know how to attack this defense at a certain degree. So things could change with the Lions actually having a very successful 2023 and how that might change their performance in 2024. Even things like injuries. So you can never really count on same. You can never really count on, we were this last year, so we're only going to be better because we made these additions. That is never the case. Trust me on that. Next up, we've got the Green Bay Packers. I think the Packers, it was a little frustrating from the standpoint of, I think they had a massive opportunity this offseason to get better, really, really good. And I would have been more aggressive if I was the Packers. But I also feel like they did take a step forward. I can't deny that. I look at their team and I say, well, they did improve the offensive line, I believe, with Jordan Morgan being a first-round pick. And I do think he's going to be a very good guard in the NFL. He could also play tackle, but I do believe he'll be a guard. I think that Josh Jacobs, long-term, was a savvy free agency signing, swapping him for Aaron Jones. They also drafted Marshawn Lloyd to go along with A.J. Dillon in the backfield as depth. I think that the Edgerrin Cooper pick was not only one that helps them now, but also helps them long-term at linebacker. Javon Bullard, the same thing. I think he's ready to play now, but also is young and is going to be a safety for them for years. Xavier McKinney was their biggest difference-making signing that I think will change their secondary in many ways. And perhaps their best addition was a new defensive coordinator. So I definitely think that they made steps forward to being a team that won a wild card game and got to the divisional round. But did they do enough to advance now to another round of the playoffs, the NFC Championship, the Super Bowl? Did they do enough to push themselves there? I might lean towards slightly no. Like, I don't think they've done enough for them to say they're going to be in the Super Bowl this year. They're going to surpass San Fran. They're going to surpass Detroit. Did they do enough? I don't know. But I definitely feel like there's a world where they might have. So I think they made a step forward. The Houston Texans. I think the Texans had a monumental offseason. I think this was a game-changing offseason for the Texans, for the AFC, and for the NFL. I think this Houston Texans team could set themselves up for being one of the best teams in the NFL for not just this year, but the next 2 or 3 or 4 years. I think that the addition of Stephon Diggs makes them that much more dangerous on offense, being led by a second-year quarterback in C.J. Stroud, who I'm almost extremely confident will be, like a regular MVP candidate in this NFL for years to come. I think that the addition of Joe Mixon will really allow them to run the ball and have a veteran, in that backfield that they can lean on in important, crucial moments. I think that Blake Fisher was an extremely savvy depth pickup for the offensive line. I feel like the defense, obviously, making additions like Danielle Hunter, who can be a disruptive force on the opposite side of Will Anderson, is something that they desperately needed. I think Danico Autry is going to be a nice big-time addition to the interior defensive line and also the edge rotation. I think Al Shire is a upgrade to the linebacker position. I think that what they did at corner, I wish they would have gotten one more guy that would just solidify that cornerback 2 position, but they added volume with CJ Henderson, Jeff Okudah, Miles Bryant, Kamari Lassiter, sorry. So the Texans potentially put themselves not just in playoff conversations, not just in, oh, it's cute, they won the AFC South, but they might have catapulted themselves into, this is one of the best teams in the NFL. This is a team that people are going to have circled on their schedule. This is a team that, look out, they could be the ones to knock the Chiefs out. So that's why I think it's monumental for them. Next up, the Indianapolis Colts. Ooh, the Colts are interesting, man. I think the Colts are a good time will tell team because Adonai Mitchell, A.D. Mitchell, he's probably the biggest X factor of the entire draft class when you factor in which team he went to, where he was drafted, who was drafted above him, the potential of what you saw in college, the physical traits. He could be a star receiver that got picked in the second round. And whenever that happens, you have a potential, ooh, this might really be good for them. But also at the same time, if he ends up being the concerns that people had for him in the draft, then all of a sudden this team just really didn't hit it, right? They really didn't hit that home run, which doesn't set them back necessarily, but just kind of disappoints, right? So, and they didn't do a lot in free agency. I mean, they really didn't. They didn't do anything to the offensive line. They didn't really do anything to the receiving core. They added depth piece in Raekwon Davis, a D tackle. They re-signed Julian Blackmon. They re-signed Kenny Moore, but they did not add anything significant in free agency. Other than maybe January Joe Flacco to be the backup to Anthony Richardson, which could also help develop the young quarterback Anthony Richardson. And you never know with his concussion history, Joe Flacco might have to step in at some point during the year. I hope not, but that could be the case. I feel like I always leave an offseason having a sour taste in my mouth when it comes to the Colts in terms of why did they not do more? Why did this team not push it? But I could also look at 2 draft picks in Adonai Mitchell and Latu Latu and say, if those guys are stars, if those guys are studs at wide receiver and defensive end, you've just got 2 stars to go along with Michael Pittman, Jonathan Taylor, Anthony Richardson, Quentin Nelson, and the core of this team. So, yeah, I still think their secondary absolutely sucks, but I also see the potential here. So, time will tell with the Colts. The Jacksonville Jags, I think they took a step forward with what they did this offseason. This one's pretty easy for me. They added a veteran center, which I think was a desperate addition with Mitch Morse. I don't think Mitch Morse is going to be a Pro Bowler this year, but I think he's going to solidify and calm down the offensive line. An offensive line that I think was drastically worse than people will give it credit for. It was not good last year. It was really bad. And that affected Trevor Lawrence, and that affected the evolution of the offense. Javon Foster, I think, was a decent pick in the guard position in the draft in the 4th round. I love the Brian Thomas Jr. draft pick. I think that he could be the number 1 X receiver for this offense and Trevor Lawrence for years to come. A downfield, vertical, big receiver who could be Trevor Lawrence's big play guy. Gabe Davis is an okay addition at wide receiver, as well as Devin Duvernay to the special teams and the receiving core. Mac Jones, I think, gives them a backup quarterback that if Trevor has some issues with injuries, I think he can step in and run an offense, especially with greater weapons than he had in New England, and potentially, win them a couple games. I wouldn't be shocked. Defensively, I think that Eric Armstead is the type of move that they needed in terms of solidifying this offensive line, or defensive line, I should say. When you look at this defensive line in the front 4, you have Trayvon Walker, Josh Allen on the edges, Roy Robertson Harris, Eric Armstead, Devon Hamilton. Those are pieces, man. This could be a really fascinating defensive line this year, and one of the low-key better units in football. And Ronald Darby replaces Darius Williams, which I think is fine. Darnell Savage is added to the mix at nickel or safety. I don't think they went above and beyond this offseason, but I definitely think they added necessary pieces. Competition at nickel, better defensive tackle, and then a wide receiver for the long term, a center that can solidify the O-line. A lot of things that I think were small, but I think add up to improving their team. Next up, the Kansas City Chiefs. I think the Chiefs, this one's interesting as well. I mean, a lot of these teams are really kind of interesting. You guys let me know what you think of the Chiefs. Do you think they got better? Do you think they got worse? Do you think they stayed the same? I think they got worse in certain areas, but I think they got better in certain areas. So I think that has me leaning towards them being about the same. So I'd probably say they're about the same. I think that they got more explosive and potentially more potent on offense, but that also is kind of dependent on what Rashee Rice is doing. But that being said, even if we disqualify Rashee Rice from contention here, Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy, if they both can be what we think they can be, Hollywood Brown might miss a few games. Xavier Worthy might struggle as a rookie a little bit. But ultimately, they could be improvements over guys like Valdez Scantling, right? Like, I wouldn't doubt that very much. So, and if they have all 3 of those receivers to go along with Travis Kelce, they could have the best and deepest receiving core that Mahomes has had, at least since Tyreek Hill has been there. So, it's fascinating. That is probably the X factor of this Chiefs team having a 3-peat or not. How good is Worthy in year 1? Does Hollywood Brown stay healthy, and is he consistent, or is he dropping the ball all the time? And what's going on with Rashee Rice? And is Travis Kelce the same guy? That's obviously not an offseason thing, but you never know. The left tackle is still a problem for me. I don't think that the rookie Kingsley is going to be able to step in and be a stud right away. I could be wrong, but I do believe he's more of a developmental guy. And I don't think they love Morris at left tackle, but I also could be wrong there. I don't think he's horrible, but I don't know. Donovan Smith wasn't a world beater either. So we'll see. It's just, you had a little bit more confidence in a proven veteran like Smith, but we'll see if they end up signing him as well. Maybe they're in one of those situations where like they're trying to give the young guys a chance and develop them, and if they desperately need to go sign somebody, they've got Smith on speed dial sort of thing. So we'll see how that works out. The running backs largely the same. Nothing to really say about that. Defensively, I think they got slightly worse. They lost Willie Gay at linebacker. They lost Mike Edwards at safety. They replaced him with Jaden Hicks in the draft. And they lost, of course, L'Jarius Sneed. So I think they got definitely worse, but I definitely think their defense is still good. Like, there's no doubt about that. You would hope that Felix can take a step forward, first-round pick from 2023. They managed to keep Mike Dana, which I think was a nice move. How many more years is Mike Pennell going to sneak onto the practice squad for them? Nick Bolton and Drew Tranquill are still there. Tranquill managed to stick around. Leo Chanel as well. And then they've got guys that can replace Sneed. It's just not going to be to the level of one of the best corners in football. So you've got to watch for that. Brian Cook also returns from injury. But the Chiefs, they're mostly the same. They got better at receiver, worse at corner. Everything else is about the same. Patrick Mahomes is still there. So you're all good. Next up, the Los Angeles Chargers. This is interesting, man. Because I think the Chargers, they probably got worse for this year. Like, I don't know if there's any denying that. I think that just losing Mike Williams and Keenan Allen alone could make them worse for right now. It could. But then again, like, Herbert got hurt last year. Like, I don't really know, though. Like, this is the thing about last year with the Chargers. Like, they weren't as good as they could have been because their coaching was so bad. And then on top of that, Herbert got injured. And then on top of that, Mike Williams got injured. And then on top of that, they were just a complete disaster. So, like, they didn't live up to their potential of what they could have been last year. I think that their record will be better than last year, right? But the team, the quality of the potential of everyone in the lineup of last year is maybe not as good as, right? Like, this year is not as good as last year in terms of when they were fully healthy, everybody was there, all that stuff, which the Chargers never seemed to be anyways. So I don't know if I can really manufacture that. But this one's tough, man. I think the Chargers I think their time will tell. Just in terms of new coach, new regime. How will this Jim Harbaugh thing work out? How is this regime going to operate? How is his culture going to have an impact in the NFL 10 years removed, right? Joe Alt, is he the certified stud of a tackle? Was he a home run pick? Ladd McConkey, was he a steal in the second round? Will he be a new number one Keenan Allen type guy for Justin Herbert? Is Corey Linsley going to stick around and play, or is he done? Then you look at the defense, like, they didn't make a lot of big-time contributions. Junior Colson was added in the draft at linebacker. Denzel Perryman added in free agency at linebacker. Cam Hart, a fifth-round pick's not really going to help things, but Christian Fulton could. And he's basically replacing Michael Davis. They managed to keep Gilman at safety, which I think was nice. Khalil Mack is aging. Joey Bosa is nearly never playing. I don't see their defense being great this year, but they still got a great quarterback. They've got an interesting running game looking forward to with J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, the Baltimore backs, running the football in this former Baltimore offensive scheme. So the Chargers, I think time will tell, because a lot of the pieces that you're expecting to help them now are also young. So I think this is the team to watch out for in 2 or 3 years, not in 2024. After that, we've got the Los Angeles Rams. I'd say the Rams, I could see some people saying they took a step forward. I could see some people saying that time will tell. I could see some people saying watch out. I could see some people saying they regressed because of Aaron Donald. I want to put them in a step forward category. But let me think about it. So, the offensive line improved on paper. with Jonah Jackson. Now they have 2 really good guards on the interior. Wide receiver is basically the same. They added 1 guy in the draft. Cooper Kupp, hopefully healthier, but he's only getting older. Blake Corum adds a little bit of depth to running back, but largely the offense is the same. Raheem Morris is gone from the defense, a certified Studley defensive coordinator. That hurts. Aaron Donald, a certified Hall of Famer, is gone from the defensive line. That hurts. Braden Fisk was drafted. That helps slightly. Jared Verse was drafted in the first round. That would help, and that would upgrade edge, but of course, defensive line is downgraded. Secondary, you would think would be better with Darius Williams, potentially Tre'Davious White healthy, Cameron Kitchens, Cameron Curl. They like their Camerons in Los Angeles. So, defensive coordinator's worse. Best player from your defense is gone, but you added another couple of young guys. Secondary, a lot of short-term solutions. Man, I don't know what to say about this team. I definitely don't think they regressed. I wouldn't say that. I could see how some of these moves help, but I could see how some of these moves don't help. So, I'm going to say the same. I am, because I think the way that I project them out is as a playoff team, a wild card team, and as a team that maybe wins a playoff game or loses the first playoff game. Like, I think they could have easily beaten the Lions last year, but they didn't, right? Like, so I think in the long run, I kind of see them as the same team with everything, added in the mix. They definitely had more additions than losses, but their losses were so significant that it's hard to really categorize it. So I'd say same for the Los Angeles Rams. The Las Vegas Raiders are up next. I think the Raiders took a step forward. I think that figuring out who their coach is first and foremost. Antonio Pierce, kind of running it back with that same mentality and vision. And what I appreciated about the Raiders is every move they made aligned with the vision of what I see for this team, which is a physical, powerful football team that wants to win with grittiness, toughness, and line of scrimmage. And I think Jackson Powers-Johnson is going to be a stud offensive lineman. I think Brock Bowers was a home run selection that fell in their lap. I think that I don't mind the Tommy Eichenberg's pickup at linebacker. I love the Christian Wilkins signing. I think he's a difference maker, and it's hard to get difference maker on the interior defensive line in free agency. They added a corner in the draft. I wish they would do more in the secondary and free agency, but they're hoping for guys like Nate Hobbs, Jacorian Bennett, and Jack Jones to take a step forward. They're also hoping for Tyree Wilson to take a step forward potentially. Quarterback, I think they got slightly better with Gardner Minshew. Running back, I think they got slightly worse, losing Josh Jacobs. But I think in the long run, running back isn't really too monumental. So I would say step forward for this team in terms of talent, but I'm not ultimately sure that they will get better as a team this year. So kind of a tricky one. Next up, the Miami Dolphins. The Miami Dolphins, I think they regressed. Only because the offensive line is... The offensive and defensive lines are troublesome. I think that, first of all, their health at the edge position is suspect. Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb, they did make sure that they had enough depth to make themselves secure in Chop Robinson, Shaquille Barrett, Mohamed Kamara. Those guys, I like the Kamara pick, by the way. Shaq Barrett, I think, could be solid as a rotation player, kind of like a Melvin Ingram for them the last, couple years. The interior defensive line, there's no doubt about it, is much worse on paper, losing one of the better guys in the league in Christian Wilkins and a solid guy like Davis. But they still have Zach Sealer. They did sign a couple veterans to help them, like Tart. The secondary, Kendall Fuller, might actually be an upgrade from Xavier Howard just in terms of consistency. Not in terms of upside, but consistency. I don't know if Jordan Poyer is an upgrade, to be honest, other than just the namesake. But the offensive line is troublesome. They lost a really good center. They lost a really good guard. in Williams and Hunt, and they replaced them with Aaron Brewer, and that's really it. Patrick Paul is a draft pick that's more of a long-term thing. Malik Washington was a nice little pickup, but he's like the 8th receiver on the team. Jalen Wright is the 3rd receiver, or 3rd running back, I should say, on the team at best, because they still have Jeff Wilson, as well as Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane. So, I don't know, man. The Miami Dolphins, I definitely think they got worse for this year, but I definitely also could say that they made some nice, savvy pickups. They tried to stay the same. It was just a lot to overcome. Minnesota. Ooh. I think Minnesota's decisions, time will tell with them, because they moved on from Kirk Cousins, which obviously makes them worse for 2024. I think that Kirk Cousins leaving, and this is what I'm going to say, right? Cousins and the Vikings last year, if Cousins would have played the entire season, they would have made the playoffs. I have almost no doubt about it. I think they would have made the playoffs. But obviously he got hurt. So I'm not talking about the Nick Mullins Vikings. I'm talking about the Kirk Cousins Vikings, just so you guys understand. But the Cousins Vikings from last year, they're going to be worse than that this year. But I also feel like they made a lot of nice moves, specifically on defense. And then they also made some nice moves for the long term, like drafting J.J. McCarthy and like drafting Dallas Turner. Now, where I really like what they did is I love the Aaron Jones signing. I think that helps them now for sure. I think Sam Darnold was a very savvy, high upside kind of dart throw at quarterback. I think that the defense got significantly, deeper with Dallas Turner, Andrew Van Ginkel, Jonathan Grenard at the edge position, along with Jihad Ward. I think Blake Cashman was a nice pickup at linebacker, as well as Jerry Tillery on the defensive line. I like that they mostly have the same secondary, but they did add a draft pick. I wish they would have added another corner in free agency. They still have time to do so, but I think that time will tell, because I think this offseason will ultimately be determined by how good was the decision to move on from Cousins. Did Cousins have years left in his career to make noise, or was he finished? And did J.J. McCarthy become a good quarterback? Should they have enticed the Patriots more in terms of draft capital to move up and get Drake May? Because if Drake May becomes the next Hall of Fame quarterback for the New England Patriots and J.J. McCarthy is the next Zach Wilson, then this is ultimately a bad decision or a bad offseason. But at the same time, if J.J. McCarthy becomes a good player and Drake May is he's pretty good, but he's not a Hall of Famer, then this might have been a great offseason for them and great decision-making all around. So time will tell with the Vikings for sure. Next up, the New England Patriots. I think the New England Patriots potentially, this is all going to come down to Drake May, right? Like if Drake May is a superstar, which I really think he could be that, I think this could be a monumental offseason for them. At the same time, though, if I'm being unbiased and I was to take the average outcome of Drake May and say like, okay, he's pretty good, but he's not great. There's some outcomes where he's bad. There's some outcomes where he's a Hall of Famer. And there's a lot of outcomes where he's in between. So then I have to factor in the other moves. How good were the other moves they made? Well, they made a lot of re-signings. Christian Barmore, Michael Onwenu, Hunter Henry, Kendrick Bourne. A lot of boring things that I think were nice, were good, were solid, made sense. Kyle Duggar, right? But they didn't really improve the team. I think that some of their draft picks, Jalen Polk could be a good receiver. We'll see what Wallace is at tackle. We'll see what Javon Baker becomes. I think he could be really good. Has a lot of potential. But honestly, it's all up to Drake May. So I think this is a good example of one where time will tell. But because of my confidence in Drake May, I'm going to say watch out. I'm not going to say it's going to be monumental franchise altering because of just one move, because I think that's too bold. But at the same time, watch out. Because if Drake May is good, especially if he's good right away, this team might be way better than people think because their defense is already really good. So just don't sleep on it. Next up, the New Orleans Saints. The Saints, they just continue to puzzle me in a lot of regards. But I think, honestly, they mostly stayed the same. I don't think they really improved. I mean, wide receiver, it's the same. Cedric Wilson, offensive line, Talise Fuaga, that definitely should help. Is he going to play left tackle? Is he going to play guard? Will he just end up being a replacement for Trevor Penning? Will he have to play for Ryan Ramczyk if he has injury problems at his later age? They're the same on paper, but the problem with the Saints is Ryan Ramczyk is getting older. Demario Davis is getting older. Cameron Jordan's getting older. Derek Carr is getting older. Alvin Kamara is getting older. A lot of their better players could go downhill. Tyrann Mathieu is getting older. Marshawn Lattimore is getting older. So that is the problem with the Saints, where regression could take place that you don't see on paper. At the same time, they might have made moves that popped them into the lead in the NFC South, right? Talise Fuaga might be a really good left tackle to go along with a healthy and still really good Ryan Ramczyk on the other side. And all of a sudden, you've got good pass protection for Derek Carr. Maybe Cedric Wilson is a good enough number 3 receiver to go along with Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. Potentially Chase Young plays like Chase Young. You never know. Potentially Willie Gay could be the partner in crime that Demario Davis desperately needed. Maybe Kool-Aid is the steal of the cornerback class. There are a lot of things and a lot of different debates. I would say, though, that mostly some of these things will be positive, some of these things will be negative, and they'll largely stay the same. The New York Giants, I think they took a step forward, I want to say. I would have to say that. Just because, Malik Neighbors, I really believe is going to be a number 1 receiver in the NFL. I think that the offensive line were smart and savvy additions. Aaron Stinney's not going to blow the world on fire, but he's a solid guard. Jermaine Illuminor is highly underrated. A lot of people don't know him, but he's good. John Runyon is solid. I think they now have a solid offensive line that won't mess everything up. I think, yes, they lost Saquon, but I'm not too worried about that, honestly. I love Saquon, but it's not like it's really going to be a huge difference in the outcome of the team. Brian Burns, huge addition. Game-changing addition to the front 7. Somebody that can play with Dexter Lawrence for years to come. That's huge. I think that the additions they made with Drew Phillips and Tyler Nubin were solid in the draft. So I think they took slight step forward. They with Daniel Jones there, it's still going to be a work in progress for that long-term quarterback, but I think overall they got better. Tampa Bay, I think, largely stayed the same. I think Tampa Bay, like New Orleans, is pretty much the same team. Or I didn't want to go with Tampa Bay, but we'll go with Tampa Bay anyway. So we slightly got out of order here. I was just too on it with Tampa. But I think that, I'd put it this way. Tampa's offensive line improved with Graham Barton. I think Jalen McMillan is a nice addition out of the draft for the future of the receiving core, but it's not going to be a huge contributor right away. Bucky Irving was a nice little late-round pick as a depth running back. But you look at the defense, and I think they got worse at corner, losing Carlton Davis. I think they got better at safety, adding Jordan Whitehead. I think they got probably the same at linebacker. I don't think Devin White really hurts or helps them either way. Edge position, they got better in their depth with Chris Braswell, but they also did lose Shaq Barrett, so it's probably the same. Randy Gregory was also added. We'll see. Defensive line is pretty much the exact same. So the team is pretty much exactly the same. And they also did lose a good offensive coordinator. So I would say they're mostly the same. If anything, I could see slight regression for the Bucs this year because I think they had a very magical season last year, and I just don't know if everything will go their way that same way. But I could also see them being 9-8 again, right? So Tampa Bay, mostly the same. Getting back on track in alphabetical order, where were we? We were with the New York Jets. I think the Jets, I think Jets fans will have them at monumental. I think I would put them at watch out. I think you could make an argument if you're negative to put them in the time will tell category, because I think a lot of people will just say like, yeah, they made a lot of cool moves, and yeah, they definitely, there's no debating, they got better on the offensive line and wide receiver and stuff, but like Aaron Rodgers is old. So like people are going to be there. If you're negative, you'll have the Jets in the time will tell category. But I think watch out is the right category, just because like it's not monumental what they did, I don't think, unless they win the Super Bowl. But I would say that watch out. Like, if things go right here, things could go really right? Like, Mike Williams could be a 1,000-yard receiver. We've seen it before. Malachi Corley, a man crush for many in the draft, could be a really nice number 3 right away. Olu Fashanu could be a future left tackle, and then also an immediate contributor to the offensive line. Tyron Smith might still have a couple years left of studly left tackle play, like, let's say, Andrew Whitworth did for the Los Angeles Rams at the end of his career. Morgan Moses could just solidify and calm the offensive line. John Simpson might give them a little bit more edge to their running game. Braylon Allen gives them size to the backfield. There's a lot of things that you could argue here. But at the same time, you could argue Mike Williams is always hurt. Tyron Smith is hurt and old. John Simpson's overrated. Morgan Moses is old. Aaron Rodgers is beat down. Tyrod Taylor, he stinks as a backup. You could make all these arguments, and it's hard to argue either way. Defensively, I think that mostly the same. I think Hassan Reddick is him and, Bryce Huff. I think Reddick is a more proven, consistent, every down contributor. Huff is younger with perhaps more potential and less downside because of the age. John Franklin Myers departs, but I don't think it will be a huge loss. They made it with good intentions, understanding that Jermaine Johnson and Will McDonald will need playing time. They also brought in Javon Kinlaw to help replace that in the inside. And they really didn't do anything in the secondary of note. I would still like them to add a safety. So really, it comes down to Mike Williams, Tyron Smith, what they did on offense to help Aaron Rodgers. And at the end of the day, that's what will decide whether this team went from, hey, they're kind of a laughing stock signing Aaron Rodgers, to like, oh, I see it. Like, they could be really good. They have a great defense. Aaron Rodgers has got an offensive line and some weapons. Let's cook. All right. So next up, we got the Philadelphia Eagles. I think the Eagles, I would put the Eagles in a similar category to the Jets. Just in terms of, like, obviously not monumental, but I would say watch out. Because last year, it was a big-time whiff of a season. Like, late in the year, it was a disaster. But at the same time, I think they made a lot of the right choices in roster management as well as coaching. They immediately addressed offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator Vic Fangio and Kellen Moore. Guys that will be upgrades to what they previously had. Even if Kellen Moore is not a guy that anyone likes, he is better than what they had. There's no doubt about it. Saquon could be a true game changer and the missing element of a potential Super Bowl team, right? Yes, they lost Jason Kelce, but they've been, planning for this for 3 or 4 or 5 years, right? They added up Paris Campbell and Devontae Parker. Could those guys just do enough as a wide receiver 3? Defensively, I think that the Huff addition adds a little bit of youth to the front seven to go along with younger guys like Jalen Carter, Milton Williams, and Jordan Davis. Linebacker, a lot of upside with Devin White. Jeremiah Trotter, we'll see what he is. Oren Burks, Zach Bond, Nakobe Dean, we'll see what they are. I still wish they would have done more at linebacker. Nolan Smith hopefully can do something this year, but that's not an offseason addition. CJ Gardner-Johnson is, though, And last time he played for them, it was really good. But that being said, he has had injury concerns. He has been an inconsistent player at times, as much as I've vocally supported his style of play. Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, though, could be those picks that fell in their laps that just ultimately end up being the reason this is a wow. They just got what they needed this offseason. Like, those were amazing picks. Cooper DeJean could be a great nickel. He could be a great safety. He's just a great athlete. And then Quinyon could be one of the better corners in football for years to come. He has all the traits to be that and could lessen the load of Darius Slay in the short term. So they might have just drastically upgraded the back end of their defense in a way that's hard to quantify, right? So that's the Philadelphia Eagles. The Pittsburgh Steelers. I think the Steelers took a step forward. Absolutely. I think quarterbacks better. There's no doubt. No matter if it's Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, they're better than Kenny Pickett. Even Justin Fields. And you guys know I'm not high on Justin Fields. The offensive line is the biggest reason I'm optimistic. I love their draft picks. I think that Troy Fontenot is going to be a stud no matter where he plays. I think Zach Frazier is going to be really solid. Mason McCormick was a nice pick in the 4th round. And I think Broderick Jones is going to improve this year. But ultimately, I love those picks. And I think that's going to get them back to Steeler football, running the ball under Arthur Smith, which I think was the best offensive coordinator hire they've made in years. And I'm really sour on Arthur Smith after he got fired from Atlanta, but there's no doubt he's a better offensive mind than Matt Canada or any of the guys they've had in recent years. The wide receiving core, Roman Wilson, I think is a nice pickup out of the draft. I wish they would have kept Deontay Johnson or at least had a guy that was replaceable for Deontay Johnson, like a replacement of a similar degree, like the same quality of player. I just don't know if they've done that with what they've done this offseason with guys like Van Jefferson, Quez Watkins, and Roman Wilson, and probably they haven't, to be fair. Defensively, I think they've improved. Patrick Queen is a monster. Peyton Wilson was one of my favorite picks in the entire draft, and I think even Dante Jackson could potentially be an upgrade over Patrick Peterson as the number 2 corner on the outside. So I think they made some nice pickups on both sides of the ball. I think they got back to Steeler identity. And I think first and foremost, they improved quarterback in the short term and they improved offensive coordinator, which I think are big things for the Steelers because they've been lost in both categories for the last few years. Next, the Seattle Seahawks. I think the Seahawks, time will tell. They moved on from Pete Carroll, which was obviously a little controversial. A lot of people agreed with it, but at the same time, I still think that it is a bold move. Pete Carroll is a Hall of Fame football coach, and I say football coach because he was successful in college and the pros. And he brought Seattle their most successful tenure in their history. So, let's not forget about that. But Mike Macdonald is one of these young, up-and-coming genius coaches in many people's eyes. So it could be a home run hiring. At the same time, did they do a lot with their roster? Honestly, no. I think Byron Murphy could end up being a really good player. But other than that, I don't think they did a lot to really move what they were before. Safety is about the same, maybe a little worse. Corner is probably the same. D-line, I definitely think they improved. Linebacker, I think they're about the same, maybe a little bit younger and faster, but Nwosu comes back healthy. That will be nice. The O-line is still kind of a disaster, and I think honestly worse than it was on paper last year, which is concerning. So a lot of this is going to come down for Seattle in the short term, down to coaching and the improvements that they've made there, and I do think they've made improvements. But I do think this team is more looking towards the future. So time will tell with them. San Francisco 49ers. I honestly, it's hard to say they got better just because they were so stacked last year. It's hard to say that they are better, but on paper, they are better. That's the thing. Their receiving core is better. Their O-line is better, right? It's the same. They just added people. So receiving core, Ricky Pearsall is he's a 1st-round receiver, and Jacob Cowing is a 4th-round receiver. There's no way they're worse. Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Juwan Jennings are all still there, so they only got better. The offensive line, their entire offensive line is still there, including John Feliciano, who was a free agent, and they added Dominic Puny, who was a 3rd-round guard, so they only got better. Brock Purdy's probably only going to be better. The running back position only added Isaac Guerrero, a freak athlete. The D-line is maybe the one area you could say maybe they got worse because they lost Eric Armstead and they lost Chase Young, but they added Malik Collins, Leonard Floyd, and then they replaced like Randy Gregory with Yetur Gross-Matos. So they're largely the same. They also added Jordan Elliott out of Cleveland. Linebacker, I think they got better with Devondre Campbell there. Now, Dre Greenlaw is coming off a major injury, which is part of the incentive of why they signed Devondre Campbell. Cornerback position, I think they got better with Renardo Green at the corner position. And I think their safety position got better with Malik Mustafa. I was high on him too. So I really like their draft, honestly. Yeah, like, it's hard for a team like the Niners to get better. But I think, honestly, they got better on paper. But some things just don't go the same way they did like last year, right? Like, they might get more injured. Or certain players might regress, like Kittle or Debo or Charvarius Ward. Like, any of these guys could get worse. Then again, Javon Hargrave could play better than he did last year. Then again, Colton McKivitz could take a step forward at right tackle. Then again, Brock Purdy could go from really good, maybe still kind of slightly system quarterback, to like, oh, he's really good. So you never know. But I would say the Niners, oh man, I'm just going to say the same. But I could say step forward, honestly. The Tennessee Titans, I think the Titans did a lot of great things this offseason. I've discussed it, and I'm probably going to make a video about the Titans. But when you land potentially a franchise left tackle, a franchise wide receiver, and a franchise corner, you've done a lot of good things, as well as a franchise center. So, and those names are J.C. Latham, Lloyd Cushenberry, Calvin Ridley, and then L'Jarius Sneed. They also added Chidobe Awuzie, Tony Pollard, T'Vondre Sweat. Yeah, so a lot of nice things that they did. So I would say that the Tennessee Titans definitely took a step forward. And if Will Levis is good, they might even be there. Okay, but step forward for me. And then the Commanders, I would say time will tell, because I think the Commanders might have effed up. I think they might have picked the wrong quarterback. I think they might have hired the wrong coach. But that's just my opinion. So I might disagree with your opinion. Your opinion might be Jaden Daniels was better than Drake May. Your opinion might be that they should have hired Dan Quinn and not Ben Johnson. Right? Like, I don't know. Maybe you really like all the moves they've made. I definitely feel like they've gotten better on paper, but I also feel like, well, Jaden Daniels might not even be as good as the quarterback play last year, Sam Howell. Their O-line really on paper doesn't look that much better. The D-line, sure, they've got better guys on the edges, but how much better? Like, how much did they really improve? So I think the Commanders, are time will tell in terms of, was this offseason really the kickstart to something special? You could make an argument. If Jaden Daniels is special, if Jerzon Newton was a steal, if they really nailed a good player in their secondary, if Luke McCaffrey is the next great McCaffrey, all of a sudden they've got a great draft class and a great team, and Dorrance Armstrong takes a step forward, and Bobby Wagner kickstarts their culture. There's a lot of things that could go right for them, but there's also a lot of things where they could have just missed. They could have made moves, and a lot of them, but they might have just not been significant. Austin Eckler could maybe just be done after a year. Bobby Wagner could be done after a year. Maybe Frankie Louvu never plays as good as he did in Carolina. Maybe Zach Ertz is done after a year. Maybe Jaden Daniels is much worse than Drake May. Maybe Dan Quinn is not built to be a head coach. There's a lot of question marks. So that's how I have it, guys. Those are my tier rankings for every NFL offseason. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this long but fun discussion about the offseason. It's Mitch. Gronk spike the like button for more. Peace.